I like D&D and I cannot lie. You other gamers can't deny. When a DM walks into the DM screen in a Dragon magazine, you get sprung. Gotta pull up tough because you know them dice of the stuff. Deep in the monster manual, he's swearing. I'm running out of rhymes and I can't stop.
That was pretty good though for a little bit.
I had it there.
Yeah.
I was prepped. I had it in my head. I'm not an incredible off the top rhymer. There you go. That's some old school hip hop for Estelle Castillo. I'm sure I could do a much better job if I actually wrote it out. Look for a new music video starring me and Amy Vorpahl. Well, apparently a long time from now, according to the look on Dom's face. Wow. Okay. Hey,
Amy wrote a rap, actually. She has a rap on her album.
On Songs in the Key of D&D?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Which you can get from CD Baby.
CD Baby.
Or otherwise online.
Yeah.
Look for it. Mm-hmm. Look for it. Hey, everyone. I am your Vanilla Ice Dungeon Master, Tom Lommel, and co-host with me, of course, as always, not as always, Mr. J Africa was supposed to be here today, but he's got a sick kid, so he is on your side of the screen, and on this side of the screen is our producer, Mr. Dom Zook. So, hey, for those of you who are not familiar with our show, I talk about Dungeons & Dragons DMing and my experience and my advice insofar as it may be applicable to your life and your world. And every Wednesday, I try and take that experience and advice and use it to, hey, Modern Chow, thank you so much for the bits. And run a game of Dungeons & Dragons on Wednesday nights. So every Tuesday we get together and talk about what's coming up in the game, what's going to happen, what's going forth, as well as other various and sundry topics. And sometimes we even take your questions. So if you have questions today, we have a little room in the calendar. Maybe we'll round out our hour together with some Q&A. So be thinking about that. We're not going to go particularly long today. We're going to try and keep it to a pretty tight hour. I am going to Canada tomorrow for a week, so
bringing the entire cast and studio.
Yes, with me too. And so therefore, Jay has graciously agreed to come in and pick up another session of the game and try and keep the plot moving. Good luck to you, Jay. So we're going to talk a little bit about tomorrow's game, but we're not going to talk in depth about it. Because I don't want to give away any secrets.
Yeah.
You don't got no secrets to give away. But I do want to talk about a couple different things. First of all, I would like to recap kind of some elements that I thought were... Yeah, right here. It's over here.
Right there.
Yeah. Talk about some elements from last week's sort of centerpiece combat that we had. So I thought there were some fun things that I would like to just highlight design-wise. No, it didn't necessarily move the plot forward, although I think I talked about this. I talked about this on Eric's stream this weekend. Eric and Havana played some PUBG this weekend. And yeah, they finished 28th out of 38, which they were happy with.
Not bad, yeah.
So yeah,
not last.
PUBG is just basically suspenseful panic. But, you know, that whole second scene of them getting indoctrinated into the tribe of the Green Treaders and getting those gifts was completely made up, right? Like, that was not planned, and I didn't know that I was going to be giving them welcome gifts into the Green Treader clan. Because I didn't really think they were going to go above and beyond and do something that was actually, like, worthy of earning their trust.
Sure.
I figured they would defeat the Waste Lady and... Thanks, you're on your way. We'll point you in the right direction. But they sort of stepped up and went above and beyond that. And I thought it made for some fun and touching moments. But it was okay. Let's get into this. And for me, it was a fun moment just because it was like, well, what can I do? Looking around the table, what can I give each of them that will be meaningful for their character, right? And I thought we hit some good notes with that. So that was a fun DM's challenge. So I want to talk about the combat, and then I want to talk about sort of, what do we call this? Prepping the right amount. And really that topic is in putting together the session for this week and handing my game over to a guest GM, what's the right amount of material to give them so that they've got enough material to work with and so that they can answer some of the questions that are going to come up that have been long-standing campaign questions, secrets, but also not giving them so much that they're going to be overwhelmed. And conversely, giving them the ability to not just fill the amount of time necessary, but maybe condense down to the amount of time necessary. So have some flexibility. So that's the other thing that I want to talk about today. And we'll talk a little bit about how I wrote up my notes. I'm not going to share my notes because it's spoiler-tastic, and that will get ahead of some of the events of tomorrow night. I don't want to ruin that for you folks at home, but that's what we've got ahead of us here. So there's a few things in terms of the combat last week that I wanted to highlight as design flourishes in that encounter that I felt made it interesting for me, hopefully interesting for you, and made the combat more than just kind of a stand-up fight. Right. Although I realized I did not incorporate enough of a dynamic terrain element. It did largely just turn into the four enemies plant, the party members plant. Nobody really moves. I mean, Havana did a little bit of roundabout, but that's what her character does. But nobody else was like, I don't need to move, so who cares, right? So that was, I think, kind of like not necessarily a flaw, but that was an opportunity that was missed, right? I could have developed some more of I talked about making dynamic terrain a key feature, and I don't think it really came about. Although, I undercut that a little bit, because there were those pillars, right?
Yep. Hey,
James V, 22 months! Thank you, sir.
Almost 2 years.
Jay is really going to appreciate that reroll that I'm sure you're going to give to the DM. Maybe not. You do with it what you want. I'm on vacation. I don't care what happens tomorrow night. They all get murdered.
Yep.
So I undercut myself because there were those dynamic pillars that got unlocked by chat. Yes. And I decided when she activated the first one that she could go to a different face and reactivate it. Now, if I had said, no, but you notice that another one is charged up, she would have gone over there. Okay. I mean, she moves, but nobody else moves. Now, maybe if the waste lady or something like that realized, those work, I can use those, then maybe we would have had the dynamic, let's race around the map to the different pillars, right? That. So the potential was there. I just undercut it by going, you can just... I was trying to keep the combat moving as opposed to that's 70 feet away, so you can move there this round, but you can't do anything else. That always feels like a waste of a combat turn. So you kind of have to balance those things out, right? So there's potential, but I undercut the potential for that. But some elements that I thought did work particularly well. Number one, the 4 statues had kind of a magnetic quality, right? They were doing these magnetic pulses. I thought that was really interesting, right? It didn't necessarily have a huge effect. They made their saving throws. Some of that is just burning a bunch of rerolls in order to make that happen. Sure. Some of it is just dice luck or whatever. Estelle Castillo!
Thanks,
16
Estelle.
months. This treasure trove of rerolls that Jay is going to get tomorrow night, he's going to feel so welcome. He's going to have so many tools at his disposal. Don't give Jay rerolls. That'll just slow things down. What?
No, I'm pointing at chat.
You're pointing at chat.
What to do.
You know what to do, chat.
Whatever the hell you want to do.
So I thought it was a fun, it made the monsters interesting. It necessarily wasn't a particularly effective technique, but we don't have a bunch of people here in the party who are heavy armor users, right? So kind of who cares? But, if one of them had gone over to where Badger was and pulsed that thing and his claws got stuck on it, that would have been interesting. It's honestly, it was a great challenge for Alton's character because he's a dex fighter. He's not a strength fighter. So for him to make a strength saving throw was actually a challenge. So Estelle Castillo says, all rerolls to Jay. He'll appreciate that. So I really liked that element of it. I thought that was great. The Waste Lady, there were two things that I liked about her. One was she just unleashed this kind of spirit draining effect on Badger. That was an ongoing thing once he failed his save. That's great. I don't have to roll dice for that.
Yeah.
It raises the stakes on the combat because every round he's taking 3d6 or whatever it is. His hit points are just shrinking away, and it's happening, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't take any steps to try and counteract that or whatever. Maybe it was a little overpowered, but I thought it was an effective way to limit the character whose player isn't there. Okay, well, if he goes unconscious, you're not diminishing the play experience of the people who are here, but you are making them go, when we got to do something. Mm-hmm. It does certainly start to put the focus on them, kind of put the screws to them. So I thought that was a great thing of she unleashed that, and then he's just constantly every round it's gonna be. I don't have to burn actions against him.
Right.
I can now turn the focus to Havana's character and start attacking her, or keep doing attacks on the NPC who's got the bow, and do extra things there. So it was a way to take one opponent and have that opponent really have a presence that was felt in multiple people of the party. So many times when you're fighting a big bad guy, it is, okay, he slams the paladin once, twice, you take 22 points of damage. Let's move on, right? The threat is really against one character. And I like that that this was a way that you could threaten multiple people using that one person without necessarily using she casts a fireball or a lightning bolt or a big area of effect spell.
Right.
It made the character or the boss monster feel much more capable, and much more nimble in her ability to distribute her threats. The final thing that I'll say about the design of that thing is I was really proud of the idea, and I don't know exactly how well that came across, that she was invisible, but only to elves. Mm-hmm. Right? So it was clear that something was going on where Zariestra couldn't see her, right? And if there had been more elves around, or if there had been if Alton had been targeting her, I would have said, well, you have a disadvantage because all you see is this gray blur because he's a half elf. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a really interesting way of compromising on invisibility. What I hate about invisibility is everybody just goes, did anybody cast Fairy Fire? Oh no, I'm out of second level spells. Okay, can we all make perception checks? No, nobody rolled high enough. I'm gonna kind of shoot where I think, are there leaves or something? Then they start rules luring you through the description of the encounter. Here's what's going. We want to know where it is. Mm-hmm. And I find that exercise to be interesting a couple times, but largely tedious once you've played 6 months or a year of Dungeons and Dragons. Right. It's just okay, they're invisible. Do I have the spell that I can counter that with? No. Okay, well then, let's area of effect with whatever. It's just not an interesting challenge in my opinion. But so this was an ideal opportunity of half, the party can see this person, but one of their key allies can't, where is she? And is firing at disadvantage and firing arrows off in different directions. Right. I really liked, Zariestra was, pulled out of the Tome of Beasts, and she was an arcane archer, alchemist archer.
Alchemist archer, yeah.
Alchemist archer, right? And so she has these super powerful arrows that she can fire. And she had the potential to really dominate the battlefield in an excruciating fashion. +7 to hit, like doing like a D6 or a D8 plus 3D8, doing like a ton of damage, right? And so she really had the potential to overshadow the party. But by creating this situation where she can't see what's going on, first of all, it's a terrific explanation for why the Green Traders are getting wiped out by this creature. They just can't see her. You know. And then secondly, it evens the playing field in terms of she has a really powerful, she has a massive amount of damage that she can do. And the problem for the party no longer becomes how do we line her up with the, you know, how do we get out of her way so that she can fire off enough arrows, to much more like what can we do to make the boss monster visible to the thing that has the Death Star ability. You know, I don't think they necessarily like caught on to that in the combat. Clearly, like anybody who watched the session knows that we were not the most focused group last week, so I don't necessarily blame them for that. But I think in terms of it being a combat challenge, like it's a puzzle that long-time D&D players like myself are not used to, where something's either invisible to everybody or not visible to anybody, unless you have somebody who has like true seeing or some crap like that, right? But you're not used to like half the group can see this thing and half the group can't.
Right.
And I thought that was a fun puzzle-like element. It was a really great balancing factor, and I thought it was a terrific way to take a game mechanic and tie it to a story beat that was happening, you know. And it's one that Jay invented, right? Like, I had no idea about this waste lady or where she came from or what she was like. He had introduced that in the previous session, and so therefore I had to like take what I was given, and I went through that session and wrote down like, okay, we know it's a cursed library dedicated to the evil gods. It's a waste lady. It's stealthy. Then you know. Great. Well, how can I make a story out of that that's interesting? Bam. I feel like we got there.
Yeah.
So those were the elements in that combat that I thought paid off. Did it probably go a couple rounds too long? Yeah. I mean, it went late. Like, I would have liked to have gotten to Cum Cernant, but we didn't, and that's fine. It actually kind of like works out better that this next session is going to be a little bit more standalone. Not just because Jay's DMing, but we haven't announced this yet, but Amy booked a job, so she's not available tomorrow night, so she will be off. Kyle will be back. That's the good news. So Kyle, Eric, and Havana will be here. And then Christina is coming in. I don't know
Christina Ariel, who you might have seen on Encounter Roleplay, I think Geek and Sundry, and Hyper RPG, and some other things, and Havana's birthday stream that she did here, where we played board games. Christina's awesome, and yeah, will be joining us this week.
So she's coming in, which kind of like makes it even better that this will be more of a self-contained session. Whereas I think if we'd gotten to Cum Cernant and gotten a lot of information out, then our next step in the plot is to go to the Darrow Lair, and I think Jay would have been in a kind of a weird kind of like balancing position of like, how much cleanup, but now what do we do with Amy's character, but right. da-da-da-da-da. So, so I think I think it works out that the combat went a little bit longer than I potentially wanted it to. I was glad that I backfilled the rest of the time with that indoctrination into the Green Treader tribe. I thought that, it laid some story seeds that I thought were interesting, and it had some payoff, some character moments that were worthwhile. Mm-hmm. All right. So I have been, over the past week, been faced now with the task of trying to get Jay the right amount of information, right? Because the party is on the doorstep of Cum Cernant and meeting Derwith the Druid, that's a huge opportunity to dump a bunch of plot information, to interrogate somebody who knows something about what's going on and fill in the blanks on some questions, outstanding questions that the party has had for a while. assuming that they demonstrate that type of curiosity. That doesn't always happen. Although Eric is really terrific about going, well, what about this? And then gets out like a map or a handout or some thing that I gave him.
I remember that.
Yeah. Oh, well, does this guy's name happen to be? And I'm like, oh, I forgot I gave him two names.
Gave him that,
Oh, that was right. There's two of those names. Yeah. So, I didn't want to write an entire campaign Bible. Maybe I should be doing that, but I also don't want to swamp Jay with that much information, right? So what I put together is I put together notes for this, specifically for this session, and it turns out to be 4 pages. Now, let's talk a little bit about how I structured this thing, and then we'll talk about like trying to hand off or prep for a session that we know it's got to be fairly self-contained, right? We want this to basically be a one-shot or standalone episode. I don't really want to have to pick up the pieces of anything that's left over from the session. I mean, I will if it ends up that way, but like I'd like this to be you have something to do and you do it, and that's the end, and we move on to the Darrow Lair next session or whatever.
Right.
Like to try and keep that adventure arc moving. Obviously, I mean, that's the challenge of any game, right? Is even if you're running your own home campaign, how much can we get done this session, and how am I going to have enough material? Am I going to have too much material, or am I going to run short, right? So let's talk about the structure, and then we'll talk about what I've done to try and address that. So first of all, I want to make sure that I don't expect Jay to have gone back and watched the other 12 episodes of Iron Keep Chronicles. So I'm like, number one, here are the hooks. Here's what is taking them to Coom Cernant, right? And this is not like any kind of spoiler type of stuff. So I can tell you just up front. The hooks are Shalfie, the Master's Apprentice, sent them there because Derwith the Druid knows something, or probably knows something about where the star fell that they're searching for, right? And as part of that, they have embedded one of the memories that from the monks that's like, go see this druid. So they've been given this mission a long time ago. You know, the disadvantage to being given this mission a long time ago is the party tends to forget about it.
Yeah.
You know, but that brings us to hook number 2, which is in last episode, Amy's character was petrified by one of the statues, and we ruled that, okay, well, she can fight it off for a while before she fully turns to stone, but the druid is the only one who has the potent magic in order to cure that. The dream treaders couldn't do that. So there's a double hook, even if they don't remember. They're like, why did we even want to come here in the first place? You don't have to have that conversation because they have a driving need to go there because Amy's going, Lowstorm's going to turn to stone at some point, right? So that's one thing. Here we go. Here you go, Jay. Here's your hook so you understand what their motivation is. Secondly, what I put a section in is just a paragraph of what the party knows about Coom Cernant, about Derwith. Basically, that's it, And so the background knowledge there, obviously, is, well, they haven't heard of any other druid other than the Great Druid. They've been sent there, obviously, because of their hooks. And they know that he uses the owls to, spy on creatures, what's going on in the forest. Right. And there was an episode where Badger sat in a tree during his watch, and basically to anything that came by would just be like, Derwith. And as a result, a treant showed up in their fight with the blood shadow demon of Lurg, and the treant and the shadow demon, battled it off for the finale of that session, right? So those are all things that they know. The next session that I put together in my notes was I put together a list of what I call developments. Maybe they should really be more accurately described as discoverables. So in this session, the party will learn the following items. Bomb, whatever I've got 5 bullet points on what that is, right? So they're going to learn these 5 things during the course of either the beginning of this encounter or throughout this encounter. Here's what they're going to learn and what's going to be presented to them. That's fine. That's more of like an informational, like what's revealed during this session. The next session of my notes is, okay, well, what are the beats? What are the scenes for this session? All right, well, at some point they're going to have to actually go to the Druid's Grove, and some other stuff is going to happen, etc., right? And at the end, there's the denouement in the session where, they've either accomplished their goal or they haven't, and congratulations, and send them on their merry way to go to the Darrow Lair. Right? So I've broken this. First, I have the information that they're going to learn, and then I have that tied to these are the scenes that we're going to present to them. In some respects, I don't know. I feel like maybe that comes across as a little bit railroady, but it is just one session. Like how much they're not like they're going to a druid. I suppose you could give them a bunch of different options on stuff to do, but this group has enough trouble staying focused that I don't like to give them a bunch of new plot hooks. Right. So limiting choice isn't necessarily in and of itself an evil thing. It's when you limit choice and inflict consequences on them for stepping outside those choices that it starts to be problematic.
That's something you've said numerous times on the show. Yes.
So that's that. So I've got a list of scenes that they can do, and then I basically just break it down scene by scene. The next whatever 4 pages are those scenes saying, all right, here's a quick setup intro to this scene. Here's the challenge of this scene. And then here's some possible developments that could happen during this scene. Like here's some ideas for consequences that may arise. Secondly, here's some information that you may need to drop. So obviously when they go to the Druid's Grove and they have all these questions about, well, what's going on with, do you know anything about this guy? And where is the star? And what happened to the Great Druid is clearly a very obvious question. They might forget to ask it, but in my mind, like I need to head that off so that Jay actually has the answers to that.
Yeah.
Rather than, it's a little bit of what happened last time is he had to tap dance on it because he didn't want to step on my toes and I hadn't given him the information. When they were like, well, what about the guy at the bottom of the mountain? He's like, we don't. We don't. We keep to ourselves. Like, good answer. So that was a good job. But he was also being put on the spot by the party and by my not sharing that information with him. So I've got, basically a whole page of, they might ask about these things. Here's what they can discover about them, right? So a big part of this has just been, you're going to be interrogated about what's going on in the world. Let me give you the answers that should satisfy them. Obviously, if Jay needs to embellish on that, there's not a whole lot that has been set up that can't be, flexed and fudged, going forward. So I can pick up and deal with that if he needs to change an answer or embellish it or whatever. But he should have the basics for almost anything. I've tried to anticipate most of the stuff that they can answer or explain why, we don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how I decided to structure these notes. Was really very bullet pointy and very focused on information that can be discovered and how a scene, what sort of challenges might be involved in a scene. The other thing that I want to address about this session is, first of all, we got a guest star sitting in, so that's always kind of a wild card in terms of you don't know, are they going to kind of lay back and go, oh, this is pretty plot heavy and I don't have a lot of questions, or are they going to be really engaged and want to make their mark and do a bunch of RP and do a bunch of bits and all that kind of stuff, which is totally fine and understandable. We want to do an entertaining show, right? But the difficult proposition, apart from that, but heightened by that, is that it's always difficult to know with this group, are we going to get through one thing, 2 things, 3 things tonight? It's kind of, that's the yardstick, right? It's very rare we ever do more than essentially 3 scenes, right? Unless you count making camp as its own scene. which maybe we should.
I feel like a lot of people do, especially the cast, the players.
So I wanted to give Jay enough material that if they decided, if for some reason they neglected the plot and did not interrogate about the Grand Druid and about all this other stuff that's going on, if they didn't care about that and they're like, we need to take care of X, Y, or Z, like this is our main priority, we want to get to the star, how do we do that, right? Yeah. Assuming that something strange happens, they become super focused. I wanted to give him enough material that he could fill out the session and run a solid 3 hours, but I also wanted to give him enough options so that if they do go off on a bunch of wild tangents, he at least has something that he can do and then kind of like call it good, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, and now you've accomplished this and maybe a couple of the roles, and great, we'll now move to the denouement and close this thing out, right? Rather than having to like cliffhanger it and da-da-da-da-da. So I've seen this design used a number of times in Adventurers League adventures, and I've adapted it a little bit. But I like to kind of call it, I don't know, almost like it's not really a hub and spoke design, but it's sort of like that, right? Mm. So for instance, they will say the party needs to challenge. The challenge of the party is they need to travel from the hunting lodge on the edge of the glacier, across the glacier, and arrive at the cavern on the edge of the mountains on the other side of the glacial valley, right? And in Adventurers League, what they will say is, this journey will take 3 days. Pick 2 of the following 6 encounters and run them. We suggest that at least one of the encounters be da-da-da-da or whatever. Mm-hmm. But what they'll do is give you sort of a menu option of, okay, if this group is really combat heavy, let's have them be attacked by a Yeti and have a combat scenario. If this group is really RP heavy, here's a scenario where some sort of hunter has been lost out on the ice and he needs help or blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, mm-hmm. That's some sort of RP encounter that you can have. If you would like to give them a series of skill challenges, the river has thin ice and they can see that there are ice flows moving down the center of it, and so their challenge is to navigate the thin ice, step their way across the floating ice and the ice flows and safely reach the other side of the river, whatever that might be, you know, etc. And so the nice thing is they give you a series of short mini encounters, not very deeply described, not very deep in terms of they have multi-scene kind of twists and turns and developments, but just sort of little bite-sized challenges. And then you can pick as much or as little as you need. And on top of it, you can pick the ones that speak to you as the DM and also suit your party. So if you have 4 bards in the group, you don't necessarily go for the, you know, vicious Yeti encounter or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Or likewise, if you have 4 paladins in the group, maybe you definitely put in the we're going to try and cross the river kind of, you know, thing and do a bunch of dex checks. Let's see what, you know, you're gonna have to be ingenious about this one. So you can kind of pick and choose the challenges that you want. So that's what I've tried to do with Jay's session tomorrow night, is say, okay, well, here's the task that they need to accomplish, and here are 5 different things that you might present to them, but pick the one that you like, right? Or pick the 2 or 3, whichever ones speak to you. You know, obviously, if you pick a combat encounter, you're going to have to allocate, you know, oh, okay, well, I've got an hour and a half left. Great, let's slot in this combat encounter. That seems reasonable, right? Likewise, if you only have half an hour left, well, let's put in this thing that seems like an interesting skill challenge and see if they can figure it out in half an hour. And they should be able to figure out a skill challenge type of thing in half an hour, right? And if you have somewhere, you know, if you have an hour, well, maybe I can do 2 different encounters, or I can, you know, two short encounters, or I can make the skill challenge a little bit easier and include kind of a light combat kind of thing, right? But especially when I know I've got somebody like Jay coming in who's an experienced DM, he can look at this ahead of time and go, "Oh, this is interesting. I like the way that this this speaks to me. This I'm not sure. Oh, I want to tweak that, whatever." And then at the table, doing clock management, kind of playing off of the players, decide, "Oh, I want to present them with this or that, whatever it might be." Right? So it's session design, encounter design that's sort of stolen from some stuff that I've seen in Adventurers League.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't. I'm kind of like now. It takes the place of in traditional written adventures of the random encounter table, right? It seems like traditional adventures go, these are the encounters that create the plot. And they put a lot of focus into describing all of those locations and those developments and those NPCs and those events. And they go, and oh, by the way, here's some random encounters that you can sprinkle in if you need to change your pace. Although the random encounters don't seem to be spun with a ton of purpose to them. And in this kind of design, it's a little bit more. The plot isn't that important because it's an A to B type of thing or whatever it ends up being. But the fulfillment of it has much more possibility. If you follow my, I wrote an adventure for Adventurers League called The Spirited Investigation, and if you've downloaded that, you'll see that a big portion of the adventure takes place at a masquerade ball, right? I'm always a big fan. I think like infiltrating places in like costume is like a fascinating kind of like scenario. So of course I stole it to write this adventure. But a big portion of it is you're all competing. You're competing teams within this masquerade ball, and you're competing in these various events.
Oh yeah, you ran this here also, right?
I ran something like it.
I
ran something like it, right? Always steal your own ideas and put them in print if you can. And so the great advantage to that is it says in the adventure you can see what put the map out on the table of these are the events that are going on. You can give the party a little description of what each of them is like, and then you can have them play as few or as many of them as time allows. So if they're only interested in 2 of them, you go, oh, okay, well, guess what? You got here late. It's midnight. Time to go, settle up everybody's score and see how everybody did. Or if you have a bunch of time and they're really enjoying it, like, why not play through like 6 of the 6 scenarios or whatever,
right.
or 5 of the 6. So I like it in terms of it's dynamic. It expands or contracts based on how much time you have in the session, and it also expands and contracts based on how much interest the party has in a particular type of encounter.
It's which, like you said, is sort of beneficial for something like Adventurers League or a con game where you have a limited amount of, or a streamed game where you have a limited amount of time. You still need some sort of challenge scene or something to get them through. But also, it's you said it may, like, fighting a Yeti may not be great for a team of 4 bards, but crossing a stream might be interesting for a team of 4 paladins or whatever. And really, it's the bards. I mean, either way, it's about the players, right?
Right.
It's about what the players kind of, if they're bards.
And fighting a Yeti might be, I don't know. That's where you're going, probably, right? Like,
it might be that might be what the bards want.
Right.
They want to have something to show off, and
we're gonna cast Tasha's hideous laughter on this thing or whatever,
over and
then
over
we're
again.
going to dress it up and charm it and make it be our servant or whatever it is.
Yeah. So it's nice because you can tailor it not just to the party dynamics but to the player dynamics as well.
Yes. Yeah. And to me that it's a 3-pronged thing of what is the party composition like? What are the players interested in? And thirdly, and I don't think that this gets enough emphasis is what is the DM interested in?
Right, yeah.
You know, because so many times you're presented with, here's the plot and here's these 4 scenes that they have to get through in order to get from A to B to C to D. And I will go, well, I don't think this dungeon crawl part of it, where they just basically have to fight their way out of this dungeon, is interesting. So I want to replace that with something else. And that's why I end up hacking things so many times, is because it doesn't speak to me and my DMing style and what I want to put forth on the table. And, you know, some of that, of course, is my judgment as the DM going, well, what are the players and what are the party composition?
Yeah.
Like, what's a good fit for that? But a big part of it is, what's my DMing style? What am I good at? What do I think is fun and interesting and engaging? And there's nothing worse than DMing an encounter that you're not interested in.
Yeah.
Like, it shows. It burns you out. It's a really tough position to be in, where you're like, okay, guys, well, this is the fight where there's 35 orcs, and why don't you roll for initiative, because they're all exactly the same. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
you know, so I think that's that third prong of knowing your audience, which is your audience is also you. Mm-hmm. And for this session coming up tomorrow night, I have to keep in mind, like, my audience for the DM is not me, it's Jay. So let me throw some things out there, like put some little, like, I don't know if you want to call them encounters. I guess they're little encounters. I think obstacles is like a fair description. You know, they're each kind
Bumps
of
in the
like
road.
mini encounters. They're each their own little obstacle, right? But it's not, you know, it's not like a dungeon, which is a whole bunch of things that you have to figure out and fight and defeat and escape and subvert and da-da-da-da. It's more like, what's this scene, what's going on, what's the premise of this scene, and what's the obstacle that they can overcome, and what are some potential developments that could happen that further complicate it, and what are... I don't even really suggest too many ways of, like, how they could defeat these things. Sometimes it's obvious, but oftentimes it's like, here's the premise, let the players figure out how they want to defeat it and respond in real time. And especially when I know that I've got somebody like Jay who's got a ton of DMing experience under his belt, I'm more than willing to trust him to make that adjudication on the fly of like, you know, that sounds like it might be kind of a tricky balancing act. Why don't you give me an acrobatics check or whatever it is, and to set the DC or whatever. I give him some guidelines. It's not like Wild West time, but I don't think, you know, I think when you were talking about, you have a fixed amount of time you want to get through a session, whether you're playing an Adventures League game or you're playing on stream or whatever it is. Like, Dungeons and Dragons, a Dungeons and Dragons game is about overcoming obstacles, and so you have to have some sort of obstacle, whether it's a social obstacle, some sort of exploration, some sort of avoidance, or some sort of combat type of thing, right? And that's the main engine of the game. Is you present the players with an obstacle, they overcome it, and then they are rewarded either by moving the story forward or getting XP, gold, treasure, reputation, whatever it is. So you've got to have an obstacle. And I think I've put together a nice little smorgasbord of options for Jay to pick and choose as he plays. We'll see how it plays out tomorrow night.
Yeah. I'm excited. It should be an interesting dynamic. Christina's a lot of fun at the table, and then with Kyle back, that will really, you know, will bring back or solidify kind of what he was going after and stuff. And you know, I think it will be interesting when as they go into that encounter with the druid and everything. Like, that's something we haven't had in a little while. We've kind of been doing combat a bit, so this will be.
I will say, one of the reasons that I haven't talked much about what's happening tomorrow night is there are some big reveals waiting for them when they get to Cum Cerna in terms of information that they have, and also in terms of things that they assume are that they assume they know the ways that the world works. And so I think that's going to be, you know, I remember at one point I like wrote down a note for Jay like, oh, by the way, this is going to be very mind-blowing to them because of stuff that happened earlier in the campaign. So if they freak out, you know why.
Yeah.
Like, just FYI.
They were dead the entire time.
So, yeah, they're still inside Lowstorm's dream. This time, Strumthrum wakes up and she sees a giant going, oh, you had the dream again. I will say that I've decided to deploy my tried and true tactic of making Christina's character a monster. So I think that will be, but I think that'll be fun for her, right?
But what kind of monster? We'll see.
I guess we don't need to reveal that one. That's fine. It is one of my favorite tricks, just because I don't have to come up with a 5th level character with all the stuff that they can do, and then overwhelm her with, oh, these are your 12 spells,
Right?
You know.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, you also have these 5 abilities, but these ones you can use anytime. These ones you can only use on a short rest, and these ones you can only use, you know.
Yeah.
Like, the great thing about a monster is you can look at that stat block and you immediately know the things that you can do. Although it's much more limited, it also gives you a lot more, I think, like role-playing potential to go, oh, wow, what would this monster be like? And there's not a thing of like, well, all dwarves are Scottish, so therefore you have to, you know, you don't have to play into the stereotype of what is an elven ranger like or whatever.
Right.
Or you don't have to fight the stereotype of like, oh no, well, this elven ranger is really into singing battle songs. Whatever. So that's been my design approach. It's going to be an exciting. I mean, I'm interested to see what happens, like how it plays out tomorrow night.
Yeah.
I will not be watching along. I will be in the land of expensive internet. I did put together some other handouts for Jay of like, okay, well, here's a map. You know, this isn't really much of a explore the Druid's Grove type of thing, but here's a map if you need it, and here's a handout for you, and here are some handouts that the party has that you might want to look at before you go, because they might bring them up. They might not, but they might bring them up. So there is some background information there that it's more than just 4 pages of notes, but the meat of it really is just 4 pages of notes. Yeah, I think it'll be in a very interesting.
Yeah.
You know, we've had a number of secrets sort of like hanging over the players for a long time, and they haven't been able to pick at the threads and really unravel them. And I think tomorrow night is a great opportunity for a big info dump. And I will be sad that I don't get the pleasure of letting that stuff loose, but hey, that's, you know, there's nothing you can do about it. I'm glad to like try and keep things trudging ahead and keep going with the storyline.
Yeah.
So there you go. Cool. We got like 10 minutes left. I mean, we'll take a question or two if you want to ask a question about the game. I'll, you know, reserve the right to not answer things that are going to be too spoilery for tomorrow or the future. But if you have a question about the game or about how I've been running the game or anything like that, or you have a question about
any
role-playing games, whether generally I like to talk about running role-playing games, but also...
what's the deal with role-playing games?
What's up with role-playing games? But also if you have a question about, you know, playing them or a problem in your group or something like that, I'm happy to talk about that. I do want to give you an update. You know, last week we talked about the Channel A Kickstarter. I talked about that on stream, and that funded. So I don't know if any of you backed that, but I really wanted to play. Like, I really wanted that game, and I really kind of like whipped that one. I flogged that one pretty hard on my Dungeon Bastard account. But I'm glad to say that like we had like $1,000 left to go, and at $30 a game, that's, you know, 100 backers that need to show up, you know, or more.
$30 a game.
I'm sorry. That's, it's 30 or 40 backers. Yeah. We needed like 100 backers in the last 48 hours, and we got there. So it was a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, it's a push. Emperor Riptide says, so you said you hadn't built a campaign Bible yet. If you did, how would you go about it?
Well, I think honestly, I would probably use a tool like Scrivener, right? So Scrivener allows you to compartmentalize things into basically sort of open-ended index cards, right? So you can go, oh, here's what happened to the Great Druid. Oh, wait, that gives me an idea of these lumberjacks. Oh, there's this black cube. And my problem with almost every other word processing software is that it goes in linear fashion, and my brain doesn't work that way. I get distracted. I come up with something new. I really want to put a bunch of things out there. A lot of times what I will do when I'm thinking about this stuff is take a big 12 by 18 piece of paper and just start dividing it into columns and making kind of like weird open-ended index cards of my own on a single piece of paper so that I can see it all at once without necessarily having to keep flipping through. Or what I like about that is it's all on one piece of paper and I can just navigate and handle one piece of paper. Whereas if I've got a bunch of index cards, I end up circling around. Wait a minute, where was that? Okay, this guy. Okay, I'm gonna put it on. Wait, no. Yeah. It almost gets a little bit too fractured for me, right? Yeah. Estelle Castillo, I'm glad that you backed the KSF. Thanks for supporting it. We're one of the people who helped to bring it over the finish line. So I think I would write this thing in Scrivener, and then if you want to, you can combine all this stuff into a single document and pump it out. Yeah. Right. Potentially you could do the same thing with some sort of wiki technology, right? And then there's been a ton of stuff going on. It feels like wikis are very kind of like 2006 kind of.
I think they're handy, but they take a little bit of doing. Even if you do like a Wikia, which is free. I mean, I've been trying to get us up on the Wikia because our wiki died, and so I've been trying to build a Wikia, and it's the time involved to put it up there.
I think it's also intimidating in that you have a whole page that's blank. Yeah. And it almost creates this implicit feeling that I've got to fill up this page with information. If I just have a paragraph, it looks kind of sad and lonely.
And you have to figure out what's your template going to be, what information is going to be on it. How are you breaking out, is this page just going to be about an encounter, or is it about a character, or is it, or is this whole thing going to be about the characters embedded in here, the encounter, all that stuff?
You have to make some categorization or taxonomy type of decisions.
Which I guess you kind of have to do in other forms too, but with a wiki, that's how it works. It has to be broken up that way, or else it doesn't work.
The tools that I've seen that are most appealing to me are two things: Scrivener, and then they have a counterpart thing called Scapple, which is like a flowcharting kind of thing. And those are the two tools that I would if I was going to make a campaign Bible. That's what I would sit down and start building them in. I haven't done really what I would consider a full campaign Bible, and I don't know that I'm interested in it. It seems like so much information that what's the purpose of it? Is it to organize my thoughts? Great. Then I would do something like Scrivener or Scapple and just have all these little fragments of stuff that I would be able to search and pull up, and it would be very loosely organized but searchable. Sometimes I think of a campaign Bible as, well, this is my master document that I'm going to share with my players, and one day I'll publish this and share it with the world. I'm not interested in that. I don't want to organize it that much, and I feel like reading those things just ends up kind of burying me in details that I don't care.
I feel like the longer the campaign goes on, the more it is important to have maybe not necessarily a Bible, but have some sort of information that you can back up on. Right. But I think it all depends on what do you want to take?
Well, and honestly, I thought about doing this today, but Plot Radar, if you take pictures, if you keep track of how your plot radar is changing from session to session, it provides a fairly significant campaign Bible. Yeah. In terms of, these are all the story elements in play. No, it may not necessarily specifically tell you, oh, the Ironwood was named for this, and Varden Greycloak was do. might not tell you the details about it, but it certainly like is an evolving map of the story elements. Estelle Castillo mentions World Anvil, which is a web-based product specifically meant for world building and creative writing in RPGs. So that might be worth checking out.
Yeah, if you have suggestions about these things, go ahead and drop them in our Discord. We have a DisOrganized Play channel. These things are super cool to share with other people. I know there are folks that have questions, and Scrivener and stuff like that are good examples. DJ Regular says, is there any difference in how you'd handing over a standalone session like this for an ongoing campaign for another DM versus a complete one-shot that you mean for another person to run as far as how the info is structured goes? Basically the same or no?
Well, so the main difference is for this standalone episode, I know what characters are involved. Mm-hmm. And they're coming into it with a body of pre-existing knowledge and motivations, right? A standalone one-shot, unless you say, these are the PCs, we've got pre-gen characters, here they are, use them. You can't make those assumptions. I mean, that's pretty handcuffy to go, oh, okay, well, you have to play with these characters. The reason DMs pick up adventures is they can play with their group, and players want to play their characters, right? With a few notable exceptions, but generally that's the way. That's the premise of the play experience: is take this and you can run it with your group. So in that situation, like I feel like I have to provide some significant hooks that might appeal to a variety of play groups, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't know. For the Adventurers League adventure I was writing the third part of a trilogy, and also I knew I was writing an Adventurers League thing where the party's not going to fight you a lot on the premise. Sure. When the sheriff says, "Hey, we need you to go investigate this," you go, "Got it," and then you go off on the adventure, right? Maybe you dicker about how much you're going to get paid, and that's it. But you don't go, well, my character is chaotic neutral and doesn't believe in the law, so I'm not going to get involved in going and outing, Jonesy so-and-so. So you don't have that kind of stuff. So I feel like you need to, on a standalone, you have to give some stronger hooks if it's not an AL adventure, like give them some avenues into the thing. Certainly the inciting incident, I feel like, has to be something kind of like grabby that really hooks them. I also think that for a standalone thing that I have to hand off, I'm more inclined to overwrite it. Okay. In terms of I'm going to try, I'm trying to hit a certain word count, or I'm trying to make sure that the person who has received this, whether they bought it off a DM's Guild or whatever, feels like there's value to it. They're getting something out of it, right? Whereas if it was just, this is very skeletal notes, despite the fact that it's 4 pages, right? But I know I'm handing this off to somebody who can absorb it, translate it, and make it run smoothly and fluidly at the table. Yeah. And so that's the other part of it is I know in this particular instance, I know the skill level of who I'm turning the session over to. For sure. Whereas in a standalone, self-contained one-shot, I am more inclined to give them some pointers on how they might, how a party might solve this, or say this, their solution to this particular encounter is left to the DM, and if you don't want to tackle that, maybe don't include this part or whatever, So I do try to assume that the DM who's running this has some experience and is intelligent about how they're going to be able to pick it up, but I also will put that disclaimer up front in the text, saying, I assume you know what you're doing. This is not an introductory adventure. Sure. So, for this particular standalone thing, or for this particular session, even though it's meant to be self-contained, it definitely is born of a bunch of story threads from the previous session, is meant to address a bunch of those story threads, and is also meant to spring them into a continuing arc of the story. It is not meant to... A lot of times with a standalone adventure, you kind of want to, like, you answer most of the questions.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the evil vampire is defeated, and his minions are rounded up and put to the sword, and the village is safe, right? Whereas in a standalone like this, like, you know, let's put it this way. We know that there's, like, that Cumcernan is being threatened by gnolls, right? I can introduce gnolls into tomorrow night's session, and it does not matter whether they get defeated or not defeated or like it doesn't directly matter at the end of that session, because I know if I want to bring them back and address the consequences of that encounter, I have time to do it. Whereas if you introduce something like that into a one-shot, you know, then the party manages to drive off the orcs. Okay, well, like, do we have to chase them down? Like, what do we do next? Like players also want to play a plot in a standalone adventure to completion, right? So I think it's a much different scenario than trying to take the notes of my brain and translate them into notes on paper that Jay can synthesize and use to create an engaging session.
Yeah.
And almost like, I want to say that this was easier.
Sure.
I also want to say it wasn't. Like, I spent 3 days sweating over it and didn't get done till 10 o'clock last night. But it is definitely easier because I know a bunch of assumptions that I can rely on going in. And when I'm writing a standalone adventure, there's so much you don't know about. Can they shapeshift? Will they have fairy fire? Is there a magic user in the party? No. Is there anybody who wears metal armor? Right? Which, you know, it's pretty weird that we don't really have anybody in our group who wears metal armor. Mm-hmm. You know, if I was writing a standalone adventure, like, that magnetic monster trap I would be like, oh, well, this is really going to screw them up. And then, you know, you'd have a playtest report that comes back like, well, the guy held onto his sword, and she held onto her spear, and they weren't wearing any other metal, so it didn't really matter. And you're like, what?
Curses.
So, yeah, I'm not mad that monster didn't work out that way, but that's fine. But I'm saying in a standalone adventure, I would assume that would be like a really challenging encounter.
Right.
Might not be. So in terms of being able to fine-tune the story, I feel like I've really got a tight grip on what's going to happen tomorrow night, and I have a pretty good idea of what the outcome is going to be. Mm-hmm. I would say with 95% confidence, maybe 85% confidence, because you never know.
Half the party dies.
I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm okay with it.
I see them challenging Derwith for some reason.
Oh, shit. Well, let's see who's got the bigger call lightning, I guess. So, yeah. It's just a different challenge. I will say, like, conceptually, it's easier to write this than it is to write a standalone adventure, because all of your assumptions just kind of go out the window, and you go, well, they're going to be 5th to 8th level.
Right.
Murder me, right? That's such a swing.
Yeah.
You could have anywhere from 4 to 9 players. No! You know, that, like, I appreciate that Adventurers League adventures are written for, well, this is how to toughen encounters up. But I will say, like, it's mentally is just like burdensome to try and accommodate such a wide variety of parties and circumstances.
Hello, Texas Devin.
Texas, Devon.
Bastion Feast says, my Arcana Cleric hit level 3 last session, so now I get Spiritual Weapon. I eventually decided on a big floating spellbook that clamps down. Do you have any other ideas for unconventional forms that Spiritual Weapon could take, i.e. not maces and swords?
Spiritual Weapon. I mean, I will say that, like, I love this kind of thinking outside of the box. Like, it goes back to this monster is invisible, but it's only invisible to elves. Mm-hmm. Like, I like that sort of fantastical kind of thinking. Yeah, you know, why does it have to be a weapon? It just does damage, right? And the idea that it's a floating spell book that, like, swamps on them is terrific. It could be as simple as I draw runes in the air, and those runes just go around and, like, sear people, you know, with damage, right? And as Emperor Riptide says, you could make it kind of like a creature of some kind, you know, an arcane snake made of magical fire or whatever that goes around and wraps around them and sears them, but it doesn't have any substance, so they can just walk right through it or whatever. I
like when players think of their flavor text for what their spell looks like, you know. Yeah. So it's not always like fairy fire, you know. People are like, well, my fairy fire, it's purple tinged, you know. My fairy fire is orange. My fairy, whatever. And it's just like, yeah, you think about how that works for your particular character. I think anything.
But it's a lot more fun to say my fairy fire manifests as a cloud of ethereal butterflies that glom on to the creatures in the area, and they flap their luminous purple wings. Yeah. And, you know,
I was going to say just a rolled up towel that just whips.
Yes, that's what it is. It's a magical rolled up towel. Yeah. I'm trying to think of other magic. You know, my friend Liz Brink has a really she had a really fun idea for a character who was a magic user, but their magic was triggered through potions, right? Mm-hmm. So it was not that character learned spells and cast spells. It was like, when I want to cast a fireball, I drink my fireball potion and point, or breathe, or whatever it is, right? Yeah. So I think, you know, that kind of reskinning stuff really is part of the fantastical power, narrative power that you, as either the DM or the player, should try and wield to its fullest to make D&D your game, the kind of game that you want to play, and not just like the game that everybody plays. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think when I think of all the magical stuff that it could be runes, it could be just like it could be a tongue of flame that, like, hovers above their head and then, like, zaps them with a little bolt of energy, like that sort of stuff. So that's where I would go with that stuff. That damage is. Let me put it this way. Let me just wrap up on this particular idea. Damage is an abstract concept, right? Yes, it has a type. It might be piercing, it might be fire, it might be bludgeoning, or what have you, right? But it doesn't mean anything. If I get stabbed, you know, if my character gets stabbed with a rapier for 12 points of piercing damage, if I have 80 hit points, what that really means doesn't mean anything specific and definitive. It's not like Rollmaster where you go, oh, well, you've nicked off part of his left kidney, and within 7d4 rounds, he will bleed out or contract a weird type of hepatitis that's going to kill him in 3d6 minus 2 days, right? So D&D sometimes pretends to have very specific, realistic type of mechanics, but the truth is it is largely abstract. And so if that's the case, take advantage of that. Yeah. And as long as you're not proposing that, oh, well, it's a tongue of arcane flames that shoots these little lightning bolts, therefore it should be able to magnetize the key, and the key should stick to my metal shield when I slam it on the on the wizard's desk or whatever. Like, as long as you're not making up effects that the spell doesn't do, who cares?
Right.
You know, yeah, it does a bolt of damage. That does piercing damage. Great. You know? So that's something that I would say, like you have really kind of a lot more leeway than you might think in terms of reskinning and reimagining what this spell actually looks like and functions as.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I sit down at an Adventurers League table, I will get like a little bit kind of put off when they go, okay, well, I cast Fairy File, but what it is it's a stream of butterflies. And I'm like...
Yeah.
Because sometimes that feels to me like, oh, I'm opening a door to be able to do stuff with my spells that are going to break the rules. But, especially in a home game, I would much rather see a player bring that sort of imagination to the table and take the work off of me. And it also gives them a theme. It's evocative. Right. Like, oh, okay, like I'm hooking into what your character is all about, like garden type of stuff. Okay, cool. Now I can play off of that. And when we have the impromptu tribal initiation into the Green Treaders, I know that I can give you a magical gardening cap or gloves or something like that or whatever it is.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up here in a minute, but I always liked spiritual weapon as sort of a Green Lantern kind of effect. And so, you know, it doesn't even have to be the same thing every time. It can be like, okay, well, this time it's 2 logs swinging in and smashing in, you know. This time it's, you know,
right.
You know, it's a thing of spikes that comes down or whatever. And it can, I don't know, you know, you can talk about it with your GM, but, you know, there's no reason necessarily that it has to be, you know, a mace or it has to be one thing all the time.
If you're an Arcana cleric, why isn't like a spectral owl, right? Like you summon this magical owl that swoops around the battlefield and attacks people. I mean, what does spiritual weapon have? It has a movement and it has an attack bonus and has the amount of damage that it does. That applies to so many things in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't remember what it was. I had a sniper, like a sniper character. He was a thief. He was a rogue, and so he had sneak attack damage, but he was a ranged bow specialist. He was a sniper specialist, right? And so I would always like whenever he scored his sneak attack damage, especially on a crit where you're rolling like a bunch of it, I would always say stuff like, okay, well, I fire my arrow into the air and I rip open a rift that leads to the pocket dimension of arcane arrows, and it rains down just like 35 arrows onto this one guy. Right. And he takes, 29 points of damage or whatever it is from all of these. And then the rift closes and the arrow clatters to the ground. Mechanically, did I change anything? No, but it's cool as hell.
Right.
So, all right. Hey, everyone. A great discussion today. I'm really excited about tomorrow night's game. I'm enthused to have Jay sit here behind the table, and hopefully he'll be a little more comfortable dealing with the players, because I felt like for the first week back, they were all kind of like a little hyped up and just sort of like going willy-nilly, like throwing bits at them and whatnot. Yeah. And I was like, woo, this is a lot happening. So hopefully he'll have a little bit more of a feel for the reins here. Jay, I give you carte blanche to rein it in anytime you need to rein it in. If you feel like the group is getting a little too out of hand, you have the power. So yeah, thanks so much to everybody who subbed up during the stream here, James V and Estelle Castillo. And thanks for the bits, Modern Chow and whatnot. Thanks to everyone who tuned in and either joined the discussion or retweeted us or what have you. It is really due to your support and spreading the word that we're able to keep growing the channel. We got a lot of exciting. I'm looking at the board for what's next on Saving Throw Show, and there's a lot of great stuff on this board. Let's run it down. Tomorrow, well, why even start with tomorrow? Tonight. The Garden of Good and Evil.
Yeah.
Stephen Pope.
Stephen Pope's Changeling the Lost, 2nd edition.
Episode 2?
Episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really fun. Stephen knows Changeling extremely well. If you've ever been interested in the storyteller system, if you watched Uncanny Valley and really liked Gap, Deanna's character Gap, who was a changeling, definitely tune in and watch this one. They just got started, so it's a great time to tune in and watch. It's a blast. It's a ton of fun. So
Eric's in it.
Eric, Kate Friedlander, Michael Holmes, and Tracy King.
Nice. Terrific. So that's tonight at 8 o'clock. Tomorrow,
Find out what the hashtag WTF Tracy means.
Oh, wow. All right. Okay.
You probably already know.
Tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, Jordan Caves-Callerman and Megan are back for another installment of Couples Therapy. Did we get to the stretch goal where
Peter Stormare
will show up and play a bad guy?
We didn't quite make
the $10,000 stretch goal?
We were $9,925 short.
Well, all
contacting Peter Stormare.
Guess what? This week we have another opportunity to try and unlock the mighty Stormare.
That's just for contacting Peter
Stormare. Irony Golem says, as a DM, I need a topic on bards. Everyone's playing them. For the life of me, I can't figure out why. I want to build a bard college, but the class is lacking for focus on me. People play it looking for what experience is a bard. I will say, just very quickly, it's an opportunity for people to defeat things in ways that don't necessarily involve combat. I think that's what people are looking for.
Yeah.
They're either looking for mischief, misdirection, or what's another M word? A mind control. Yep.
Sure.
Yep. Those are the three. I think those are the three. Yeah.
Yeah.
It also gives them a cheap and easy way to do some singing, crack some bad jokes.
It's also support. Sort of, it's a support that doesn't have to be, specifically like a healer or something like that. So I don't want to play a cleric. I don't want to be tied into a pantheon and everything like that. It's like, okay, bard might be where you want to go.
It's also a great thing for they're like the fixture character. They're somebody who knows everything, but they're not the thief. More trustworthy than the thief, less trustworthy than the cleric. That's the bard.
And a good face for the party.
Yeah. So that's tomorrow at 4. Couples therapy. There may be barding. There may not be barding. I don't know. There's usually jump scares. So that's
a couples therapy.
Yeah, couples therapy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tune in for that. 8 o'clock tomorrow is this Iron Keep game. Boom, boom, boom. Tune in at 8 tomorrow and see how Jay does. I think, like I said, I'm excited about the session. Friday at 8, we have Wild Cards, episode 3.
Yeah.
Yes, of 3 of what? 10?
3 of 12.
12?
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you been hunted down by any all-powerful Minotaur zombie
coming.
demons?
It's coming. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Very good. Sunday at 1 o'clock, America's GM, DJ David Crennan. That's
happened
old.
On Sunday. See, we're moving through the week. Now we're at Tuesday.
Oh, I thought you changed what these things were.
No.
Well, we're still having Tempting Fate at 5 o'clock on Sunday, right?
We are not, actually.
No?
No.
None of this stuff is true. It's all lies.
Yeah.
The rest of the board is lies. Somebody already put it in the chat. ! Calendar shows you what we've had this week. You're going to have to tune in later to find out what's coming up next week. How about that? So, Irony Golem, I would love to discuss this further, but you know what? I've got a pack for Canada, so why don't we put a pin on this one, and we'll come back and talk about bards.
You can always go to our Discord. We have a Disorganized Play channel on our Discord.
Yeah.
Happy to continue this discussion for you, but we'll be back next week at 2 o'clock, I believe, unless something magical happens and we can't do it at 2 o'clock, but... so come back next week and we will try to make some time.
Carve some time. Depends upon how much of a shambles Jay has left.
Yeah.
My beloved, my precious game, which I have so finely crafted to be such a tight, well-oiled machine of storytelling.
Old man Tom.
Still a little sick.
I'll also say we have a bard in the party in Iron Keep. So if you're curious about like how it works in a party dynamic, we have one example of it. That's not the definitive example of a bard, but
I disagree.
Yes, Havana
is the definitive example of how to play a bard.
What? Are you kidding me?
That was a terrible
Havana movie.
Awful. Hey, listen, I can only impersonate one player well at this table, and we all know it's Kyle Caps.
Yeah. But yeah, please tune in tomorrow, and we can talk more about that. That's 8 o'clock Pacific for Iron Keep with guest GMJ Africa.
End of the month is coming. Please back our Patreon. It is through your lovely support that we're able to keep the lights on here, so please consider backing the Patreon. I will have, for sure, one of the handouts and maybe all of these notes, depends upon how much of this information comes out, available for our Patreon backers later next week when I get back from Canada. But certainly I'm going to release, I put together a nice handout that I spent a little bit of time on, and I'm going to drop that in our Patreon folder for people to pluck and enjoy. So, that's the buzz. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, let's dungeon!
Beat that, Tom.
All right. Well, I like Dungeons and D&D, and I cannot lie.
I hate you.